Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Legion video. Today I'm going to be giving you an overview of the class changes that are coming in Legion. Now, Blizzard are going to be releasing a series of blog posts over the coming week that are going to be going into specific detail about each class. I will cover them, but this video is to give you a general idea of what they've got planned across the board so you can get a sense of how things are going to be. Overall, they have three design goals in Legion, and they are to make classes more immersive, more distinct, and more empowering. Immersion involves making everything feeling like it belongs to the class, including animations, spell names, and UI elements. By empowering, they mean that they want to give you more control over how elements of your class play, and then finally for distinction, well, they just want to make the classes and specs feel more unique and different from each other. Before I go into the specific classes, there are one or two things to clear up, and I'm going to start off with talents. Now, they don't have themed talent rows anymore. Essentially, the way it works currently is we have the AoE tier of talents, we have the movement tier of talents. They think that's boring because you're choosing between three things which ultimately end up being the same thing if they're going to be balanced. So instead, utility and throughput will be spread out, and there is also going to be less talent sharing between the specs too. So overall, they've said that they're going to be adding hundreds of new talents to the game, which is certainly quite interesting, and yes, it will be using the same Mists of Pandaria styled system, however, one that's shaken up a bit. Another big announcement is that they are going to be having, well, not just triple spec, but also quad spec if you are a druid. Yes, you will be able to switch into any spec at any time, and it's going to save things like your action bars and even your transmog outfit if you so choose. So with that said, and those goals in mind, let's go through the major changes class by class. This is based on the systems panel and a number of interviews that have been released. And first of all, we have Death Knights. Death Knights are seeing big tweaks to the runes. Blizzard felt that three types of runes resulted in you spending loads of time looking at your UI, so now they are making all of the runes the same type. You're going to have 6 runes, they'll work roughly how they do right now, but the types don't exist anymore, so you won't have to worry about a specific type of rune being on or off cooldown. They also feel the DPS snapshotting being gone really took something away from the unholy spec, so what they're going to do is add something called Festering Wounds, where abilities will place a debuff on a target. You can stack up multiple of these debuffs, and they can be popped by other abilities. We'll probably need more specifics on that. They also said that raising corpses didn't really feel as cool in-game as the fantasy does, and the Death Knight talents might involve raising multiple pets, different pets, or even stronger pets, which I think is definitely a good move. Also, Frost is going to play rather similar to Live, but Blood is going to get some more changes, especially taking into consideration what's been going on with the rune system. Next up, we have Warriors, and with Fury Warriors, they are moving away from the idea of having charges, as Blizzard don't really like how you're staring at the UI, and I suppose that is a bit of a common theme throughout a lot of these changes. Now, when you're enraged, for an example, you will be able to just use Raging Blow as much as you want. When you're doing Whirlwind, you're not going to have to worry about Meat Cleaver. Essentially, they like the idea of you building up resources and spending them as opposed to monitoring a specific buff to see if you can do a specific thing or monitoring charges of something. And next up, we have Mages. Similar enough to the Warrior situation, they didn't like how arcane charges worked as a buff that had to be monitored, so instead it's going to be a class resource. They don't like how mana mismanagement can mess up a fight so much for so long, so they're going to be scrapping that mechanic and bringing in a new mastery, and that mastery is going to increase the size of your mana pool and the damage of your arcane charges. It seems like the goal here is that by increasing the mastery, we're able to spam more things before we run out of mana. I'm not 100% sure, and we'll have to wait for more details with the class blog. Next up, we've got Hunters, and the Hunter blog is already out, so today's other video is going to be going in depth about Hunters because they are my main class. Next up, we've got Priests, and they are getting really big changes. So Discipline is now a full DPS healing hybrid. They have doubled down on Atonement as a mechanic in order to make it feel different from the Holy Priests. Power Word Shield spam is also apparently going to be a thing of the past, though you still will have Power Word Shield from what I can tell. Shadow is also getting pretty extreme changes, as they said that Shadow often felt like a pure affliction warlock. They are going to be tapping into the old god Void energy for their source of power, and as they do this, they will be building up insanity and eventually going into a Void form. As their insanity increases, they gain visual effects like a darker shadow form and tentacles. Gameplay-wise, what's going to happen is that abilities will generate a resource called Insanity. Once you hit a certain amount of Insanity, you will transform into Void form. In Void form, you will do crazy amounts of damage, but Void form will not last forever. You can stay in Void form for longer by generating more Insanity, but eventually it will wear off. It seems like they're really trying to carve out more of a unique fantasy for the Shadow Priests, which is quite a good thing. Now, Shadow's not going to have heal or flash heal, instead they're going to have Shadow Mend, which is double as good as heal, but half of the healed amount will fade away after 10 seconds. If you take damage though, it comes from the Shadow Mend amount of healing. That's slightly confusing, but it means that if you are in combat, this is a very good heal, especially if you are consistently taking hits. Shadow Mend will also be accessible by disciplined priests. Next up, Holy are actually getting some changes. Chakra is gone as a mechanic, and they are going to be doing more around the design of Holy having the single largest heal in the game via power word Serenity, which will now be a massive single heal that heals for about half a health bar on a normal hit, or a full health bar on a crit, but it does have a cooldown. Holy will retain Prayer of Healing, and Discipline's actually going to lose it. So definitely they are trying to make these specs different, and they want Discipline to not feel like a slightly different version of Holy. Next up, Rogues are getting pretty major changes. Combat has been removed from the game, and it's being replaced with Outlaw as a spec. They are inspired by Outlaw archetypes, so that's things like pirates and bandits and stuff like that, and in fact a line of the talents are going to be pirate-themed with hooks and cannon blasts, which seems really cool. Past that, we don't have a great deal of information, and Rogues are going to be the final class blog. Killing Spree was on the cutting board, but they actually decided to make a talent out of it instead, and it will port you right back to where you started. Sub is also seeing some changes. Shadow Dance is different. It's now a passive that gives a 20% chance to re-enter stealth upon doing a finisher. So I love that feeling of popping Vanish in a fight and then, shredding again with my opener, but I can see some concerns about RNG here. Shadow Strike is a new ability that's also going to port you to a target and do ambush level damage, so it's basically a baked-in version of that talent that makes your ambush port you if you're in stealth. They're also going to be removing some of the generic abilities so that the rogue specs definitely feel a lot more different from each other. Definitely ballsy stuff. And speaking of ballsy stuff, let's cover Warlocks. So Demonology used to be about summoning demons, but then it ended up with you turning into a demon. They're changing that, and Metamorphosis is now something for demon hunters instead of Demonology. Demonology will be getting way more minion mechanics, and it's essentially a brand new spec that they're going to be working on a lot during the beta based on people's feedback. You are going to generate resources using your Shadow Bolt, and then spend that resource on a whole wide array of new abilities. One example is a rotational spender ability that summons a pair of Dreadstalker demons to attack your target. They also said that Hand of Gul'dan is going to drop a meteor, and then summon imps for each soul shard that you spend on it. And also a lot of the new talents are going to be in and around summoning demons. I suppose in many ways it sounds like this is going to be a kind of minion horde class, maybe like the Necromancer from Guild Wars 1, I believe. Druids are actually getting pretty big changes as well. Moonkin, well also known as Balance, is essentially a new spec, but one that is inspired by the current spec. They don't like how UI heavy the current gameplay is because you basically just throw on an add-on and stare at a bar. They're replacing that with abilities that generate and spend a resource with different strengths and weaknesses. With that, they're still going to have Moonfire, Sunfire, Sunfall, and all of the abilities that people have came to expect with that spec. Innervate is also back, and it's going to be a utility spell for balanced druids. Stampeding Roar is going to be available to only Feral and Guardian, and cats are actually losing Rejuvination. A Guardian is going to be moving back to being a big wall of HP and armor, rather than being a kind of dodge and agility-based tank. So overall what they're doing is they're making less crossover with the specs on a base level, but they're going to be adding a talent which lets you choose another one of the specs, and you'll get some of their abilities, such that a bear tank could choose an affinity with Feral, and then, whenever they're off tanking, they could just swap over to a cat and do some DPS. You can do that to a degree now, but it seems like they're going to be supporting that gameplay more in Legion. And finally, we have the Shamans. Shamans are going to be getting a new resource called Maelstrom that is built up by using abilities and spent using others. They said it was similar to the Demon Hunter resource. Restoration will, however, retain their mana. We do have a bit of news about monks. Essentially, they're not particularly happy with Storm, Earth, and Fire currently, and they're going to simplify it and make it more intuitive. Apparently that's what they say anyway. Basically, it's going to be like Blade Flurry, in that you toggle it on and then you do AoE stuff, or you can toggle it off and go back to normal. If you have it toggled and you have your Storm, Earth, and Fire variants like running off, they're not going to attack the same target as you. Instead, they're going to go and find nearby things to attack. According to Blizzard, you're not going to lose customization in terms of what they attack, so they will be useful, but again, we'll need to see more details. So overall, with all of that, what are my thoughts? First of all, I think Tri-Spec at this stage of the game is okay. I don't think it's going to cause any major problems, so that should be quite fine, and the talent choosing, or the talent messing up, I think is going to be really good. Right now, talents are a bit stale. I like the idea of there being more specific talents on a per-spec basis, so that's certainly very good, but again, we're going to have to see how it all actually is in-game. As for the class changes, I don't want to give you super definitive opinions now because we are going to be getting specifics. The point of this video was to give you a rough idea of what they're kind of doing with classes across the board, and we can talk about the specifics later. What I will say is I like the idea of making things a little bit less UI dependent. I think that's quite good. As an example, is the rune system the most intuitive thing ever with Death Knights, or is it just annoying? I think it may be the latter, though I can see some of the really dedicated DKs not being particularly happy about that. As for rogues, I agree with what they're doing. I think the rogue specs all feel very similar, though I do enjoy my rogue quite a lot. As for warlocks, I know it is a big point of contention. Personally, I am far more interested in a mass minion summoning spec than I am a metamorphosis one. I think it's overall a good thing. At least that's my personal opinion. I know a lot of people will disagree with me, but again, we're going to need to wait until the beta comes out. As for the druids, I actually agree with what they're doing with Moonkin. I think right now it is a terrible spec. I dislike strongly how it plays. Players have so little control. You're just following a bar, and you're also staring at a bar, which makes it boring. If they can give players more control with what they're going to be doing with druids now, then I'm quite happy. I also like the idea of them allowing you to kind of like half spec into another druid spec. I think that's a really cool talent, but maybe a talent that's going to be quite challenging to balance. The hunter changes are extremely exciting to me, especially, the whole idea of survival being a melee spec. I cannot wait, but I will talk more about that in today's other video. So overall, there's going to be a lot of tough balancing for them to do. That's going to be a very big challenge, and I'd say this beta is going to have a lot of tuning from day one, because they have a lot of work to do if they're going to be making so many fundamental changes to how the classes work, and also add in so many bloody new abilities in terms of what's going on with the talent system and the stuff that the artifact weapons adds on top. They've got a lot of work ahead of them, certainly. I think some of these changes are going to be good for gameplay, but we need to wait and see how the specifics are, so I'm going to close off this video here, and stay tuned to the channel for more specifics as the week progresses. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.